They figured I was just some rich ranch owner they could push around. How cute. When they set fire to my century-old barn over some petty membership squabble, they had no idea who they were messing with. The quiet guy from the land management office? Yeah, I'm the one who oversees every land grant decision across the entire state. Oops, they smugly believed their precious little handbook would shut me down. Adorable. While they were busy obsessing over whether my grass exceeded regulation length, I was laying the groundwork for illegal earthquake-ia building alliances with people who actually matter. Now I'm not just reclaiming what's mine, I'm about to teach them a hard lesson in real power. Drop a comment about the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever come across, because these clipboard crusaders, they're about to learn the hard way that they picked a fight with the wrong guy. Buckle up, this revenge tale is about to get gloriously chaotic. I never planned to be a rancher. Growing up, I spent summers on my grandfather's land just outside Boulder, Colorado, but life took me into a quiet desk job in the county's land management division. I was content until a phone call last spring changed everything. William, your grandfather left you the Hayes Ranch. All 15 acres of the house, the barn, the whole thing. Just like that, I inherited my grandfather Harold Hayes's legacy. A property that had been in our family for over 100 years, along with a sacred spring, a natural water source once revered by indigenous people for its healing properties. The ranch was stunning: open pastures, mountain views, a sturdy farmhouse, and a grand timber barn hand-built by my great-grandfather. What I didn't know was that it had become a peaceful island surrounded by the fast-spreading Golden Meadows development, an upscale, gated community with an old grudge against our family. Trouble showed up just 3 days after I moved in. A cream-colored envelope with embossed letters arrived. Welcome to Golden Meadows. Inside was a notice claiming that, thanks to recent boundary changes, my land now fell under their jurisdiction. The next day, a black SUV with the Golden Meadows logo pulled into my driveway. A sharply dressed woman in her late 30s stepped out, sunglasses perched on her head. Mr. Hayes, I'm Elizabeth Montgomery, president of the Golden Meadows Homeowners Association. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked over the old farmhouse. There's been a mistake, I said, arms folded. This land has never been part of Golden Meadows. Her smile tightened. The county approved new boundaries 5 years ago. Your grandfather didn't accept it, but we were hoping things might be different under new ownership. The name Montgomery hit a nerve. My grandfather had written about them in his journals, a family that had spent decades trying to buy him out. Elizabeth's father had lost a major water rights dispute in the 70s, nearly going broke because of it. That night, I sifted through my grandfather's old files. Buried among property taxes and water rights documents, I found a folder marked Boundary Dispute. Inside were letters from the county confirming that his land was explicitly excluded from any development zones. Another file detailed a long legal feud with the Montgomerys, who had tried multiple times to divert the sacred spring. The following day, my neighbor George Wilson, a retired city planner, stopped by with a basket of fresh vegetables. Watch your back with that hoe, he warned. Your grandfather was the last one who stood up to them. The rest of us, we got steamrolled. My wife had to rip out her heirloom roses because they weren't approved. He shook his head. The Montgomerys have had it in for this land ever since your grandfather refused to give up the spring. Now Elizabeth runs that hole like her own little kingdom. 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of machines at the edge of my land. A landscaping crew was tearing down part of my grandfather's split trail fence. I ran out, still in pajamas. What do you think you're doing? The foreman looked uneasy. Orders from the HOA, sir. This fence doesn't meet community standards. Later that day, Elizabeth showed up again, this time with Gregory Phillips, the HOA's development liaison. Mr. Hayes, Elizabeth said in a tone that tried to sound understanding, we know this might be a tough transition. Your grandfather resisted change, but Golden Meadows has a vision that benefits everyone. Gregory nodded, beaming. We're building a state-of-the-art recreation center, right near your property. Your land value could triple. This place isn't for sale, I replied. And it's not part of your HOA. Before I could say more, Gregory cleared his throat. There are also compliance concerns. Your tractor is visible from the main road, your mailbox isn't standard, and frankly, Your barn doesn't meet our architectural guidelines. I could feel the rage rising. That eyesore was built by my great-grandfather in 1922, long before their precious development existed. That evening, they left a thick binder full of regulations on my porch swing. Later, my phone rang. It was Jerry Hoffman, an old friend of my grandfather's from the county records office. "William, someone's been digging through all the old records on your land, and something's off. Some of the online documents don't match the physical archives. I think someone may have tampered with the digital boundary maps." I looked out at the barn as the sun dipped behind the hills. Beside it stood the ancient oak that shaded the sacred spring of the true heart of the ranch. And I had a growing suspicion that's what Elizabeth Montgomery was really after. Soon, the violation notices started arriving in waves of bright yellow papers scolding me for things like grass being too long or having a non-compliant barn. The violation notices kept piling up: vehicle storage, visible farm equipment, non-compliant fencing. Each infraction carried a $50 fine that doubled every day I didn't address them. Then came a call from Abigail at the land management office. Her voice was tense. "William, I've been reviewing the boundary amendments tied to your grandfather's property. Something's off. Officially, it shows your land was absorbed into Golden Meadows 5 years ago. But I can't find any public hearing records or notice of the change sent to your grandfather, which is required by law." I wasn't shocked. My grandfather had been diligent with paperwork. He had multiple exemption letters on file. "They're gone from our system," Abigail said quietly. "Scrubbed, as if they never existed." Things escalated quickly. One Tuesday morning, I returned from a supply run to find workers in Golden Meadows uniforms trenching a line through my eastern boundary. "What do you think you're doing?" I snapped. The crew lead held up a clipboard. "Drainage work, authorization." He handed me a county document referencing some obscure statute about watershed responsibility. By the time they finished, a 6-foot-wide trench bisected my pasturia, blocking my access entirely. When I called the HOA, Gregory Phillips answered with his usual fake courtesy. "All Golden Meadows properties are required to share in watershed management. Expect an environmental impact fee of $5,000. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, outlining the HOA's emergency environmental authority. Failure to pay within 30 days, it said, would result in a property lien and possible foreclosure. George Wilson showed up with coffee the next day, eyes grim. "She's accelerating things," he said, referring to Elizabeth. Ever since her dad lost the spring rights case in '73, the Montgomerys have been after this land. According to George, Elizabeth's father had tried to privatize and bottle the sacred spring's water. My grandfather had stopped him by proving that the spring had belonged to the Hayes family since the 1880s and that it held deep cultural significance for indigenous tribes. George's wife, Linda, had been secretly recording home meetings. "They've been planning this for years," she told me, playing a clip where Elizabeth calmly said, "We acquire the Hayes eyesore. We finally control that damn spring." Even worse, I heard Mayor Harold Bennett on the same recording, "I'll fast-track whatever paperwork you need." Things got uglier. One morning, I found my secondary access road blocked with concrete barriers. A Golden Meadows construction zone and no trespassing sign hung mockingly across it. They now funneled all traffic through my main driveway, conveniently under their watch. I dove deeper into research, using every tool I had from my land management background. I pulled the original development permits and discovered Golden Meadows had been built on rezoned agricultural land, rezoned with conditions, like maintaining environmental buffers and granting public access in certain areas. At the county offices, I ran into Councilman Benjamin Foster, an old ally and environmental advocate. "Golden Meadows?" he scoffed. "They've been dodging regulations for years. Built half that place on protected wetlands. Only reason they got approval was because someone greased the zoning board." As he spoke, I noticed Elizabeth's husband walk into the mayor's office, a thick envelope in hand. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert from my home security system. County-marked vehicles had pulled into my driveway, towing construction equipment. I called Sheriff Daniel Warren while speeding home. "Someone's on my land," I said. "They've got bulldozers and no permission." By the time I skidded into my driveway, chaos had erupted. Workers were dismantling my historic front gate. Others were setting up signs, future site of Golden Meadows Community Recreation Zone. But the real punch in the gut came when I saw them near the sacred spring. Equipment surrounded the ancient oak tree, our family symbol. My grandfather had fought to protect it for decades. Gregory Phillips stood nearby, clipboard in hand, smiling like a man who thought he'd already won. "Mr. Hayes, good timing," he said smugly. "We're implementing county-approved safety upgrades here. Non-compliant structures." I yanked the papers from his hand. The permits looked official, county stamps, planning commissioner's signature, but the listed owner was Golden Meadows Community Trust. "These are forged," I said coldly. "The land belongs to William Hayes. You have no legal right to be here." Gregory didn't flinch. "Due to your non-compliance with watershed regulations, the county has granted us emergency remediation rights. It's all legal." He motioned to the crew, who kept working as if I were invisible. I marched in front of a bulldozer heading toward the barn and the sacred oak. "You move another inch and I'm calling the sheriff," I warned. The operator hesitated, looking to Gregory, who waved him forward. "The sheriff's office has been notified of our activities," he said. "You're obstructing county-authorized work." I pulled out my phone and began recording. Every worker, every piece of equipment, Gregory's smug face, the fraudulent documents. Then, one worker approached the electrical panel on the barn, starting to unscrew the casing. "Don't touch that," I barked. "It's connected to the house's main system." He paused, but Gregory gave the nod. As the worker twisted the final screw, a burst of sparks exploded from the panel, making him stumble back in alarm. As the worker pried open the electrical panel, sparks exploded, causing him to leap back and drop his tools. Then someone yelled, "Fire!" A flame had caught in the dry straw near the barn's foundation and, in mere seconds, it leapt to the old timbers. I sprinted toward the hose, yelling for someone to call the fire department. Gregory Phillips backed away, pale-faced and frantically barking orders into his phone. The work crew scattered, some grabbing extinguishers, others simply running. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the barn was a roaring inferno. I stood with George and Linda Wilson, helplessly watching as firefighters fought to contain the blaze. Inside that barn were irreplaceable pieces of my family's history and my great-grandfather's tools, my grandmother's hope chest, photographs and letters spanning generations. Worst of all, the root cellar beneath had housed sacred artifacts from the local indigenous tribe, items my grandfather had vowed to protect. Sheriff Daniel Warren arrived just as the roof collapsed in a rain of glowing embers. "Jesus, William, what the hell happened here?" he asked. I told him about the unauthorized screw and the electrical panel. When Gregory tried to quietly slip away to his car, Sheriff Warren stopped him. "Not so fast, Mr. Phillips. I need a statement from everyone who was here." Gregory, adjusting his tie with a nervous twitch, stammered, "This was clearly an accident during authorized county maintenance. We have all the proper documentation." As the last of the flames died, Fire Chief Samuel Carter approached me quietly. "I'm sorry, William. We did everything we could." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Off the record, this doesn't look like a simple accident. That fire spread too fast and the panel shouldn't have sparked like that unless it was tampered with. I'll be launching a full investigation." Just then, a sleek black SUV rolled up. Elizabeth Montgomery stepped out, dressed impeccably, face set in a mask of concern. "Mr. Hayes, what a terrible tragedy," she said, her voice carefully modulated. "I came as soon as I heard." Her tone was rehearsed. Of course, had the property met Golden Meadows safety standards, this might have been avoided. Her audacity rendered me speechless. Then she delivered the blow. "Perhaps now you'll reconsider our offer. Golden Meadows would be more than willing to relieve you of this burden." Something inside me snapped. The grief over the barn turned to a white-hot, focused rage. "Get off my land, Elizabeth, now, and take your offer with you." Her eyes narrowed. "You may want to reconsider your tone, Mr. Hayes. A county inspector will be visiting tomorrow. Given the obvious hazards now present, a condemnation order is likely." The week that followed was a blur. Insurance adjusters, investigators, and an avalanche of new HOA violation notices. I filed formal complaints with the county, only to discover Elizabeth's husband chaired the appeals board. My heart sank when a certified letter arrived declaring my land abandoned and hazardous. triggering an expedited condemnation process. That evening, sitting on the porch amid a sea of violation notices and legal threats, I wondered if it was even worth continuing the fight. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, its orange glow cast long shadows across the scorched ruins of the barn. Then, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the ashes. Digging through the charred remains, I uncovered my grandfather's old fireproof lockbox. It was partially melted but still intact. Inside were original property deeds, documented water rights, and a small brass key labeled, First National Bank A Box 623. The next morning, I went to the bank. The safe deposit box contained more of my grandfather's papers, including extensive notes from his days helping create the county's land grant system. But what truly mattered were the records of the original conditional land grants for Golden Meadows. The development was built on land that came with strict environmental requirements, and more importantly, it required permit renewal every 20 years. According to my grandfather's records, the next renewal deadline was in exactly 30 days. Among the documents was a faded photo of my grandfather standing proudly beside the sacred spring oak. On the back he had written in firm script, "Remember, William, they can burn our buildings, but the land remembers who its true stewards are." The realization hit me hard. For 15 years, I had worked in the county's land management division, reviewing permits and handling compliance. I had never thought of it as real power until now. Those conditional grants weren't just old paper, they were legally binding contracts. I took a personal day and returned to the county office to dig through the archives. In the musty basement, after hours of searching, I found the original Golden Meadows permit from 1998. Its conditions were clear. 20% of the land must remain undeveloped wetlands. Public access trails must be maintained. Native plant species must be preserved. And, most critically, the permit must be renewed every 20 years with proof of compliance. Their review was due on my desk in just 27 days. Hope returned. I called Abigail Taylor. "I need everything you can find on Golden Meadows environmental compliance, inspection reports, violations, all of it." She paused. "This wouldn't have anything to do with your barn mysteriously catching fire, would it?" When I didn't answer, she continued, "I'll start digging. And William, a broken bar, be careful. These people have powerful connections." Her warning proved prophetic. When I returned to work the next morning, my supervisor, Director Gwynn Howard, called me in. She peered over her glasses with concern. "William, I got a call from the mayor's office. They say there's a potential conflict of interest involving your land and Golden Meadows." I took a deep breath and began explaining everything of the boundary disputes, the harassment, the fire, and the sacred tree my grandfather had fought so hard to protect. Gwen's expression darkened as I finished speaking. "This is exactly why we have nepotism safeguards," she murmured. "But in your Kazi broken bar, since you inherited the property recently and the conflict didn't exist when you were hired," she tapped her pen against her notebook thoughtfully, "legally, I can't remove you from handling their renewal application unless a formal complaint with documented bias is filed." "None yet," I admitted, "but Elizabeth Montgomery has strong ties to the mayor." "One is probably on its way." Her eyes narrowed. "Until then, carry on as usual." "But William, document everything, every conversation, every email, every shred of evidence. If this escalates, you'll need a solid trail." That afternoon, I received a notice. My property was scheduled for a health inspection due to anonymous complaints. Almost simultaneously, an email from Abigail landed in my inbox of her findings on Golden Meadows. What she uncovered was damning. Repeated environmental violations, wetlands illegally filled to make way for more housing, protected trees cut down, toxic runoff from the golf course contaminating the watershed. Most shocking of all, 7 HOA board members including Elizabeth Montgomery had constructed home additions without the required environmental impact assessments. If they submitted their renewal application without addressing these violations, I'd have legitimate grounds to recommend denial. When I arrived home that evening, several Golden Meadows security vehicles were lined up near my fence. One of the men approached me as I parked. "Mr. Hayes," he said smoothly, "we're documenting potential safety hazards for tomorrow's inspection. Any hazard you find was created when your people burned down my barn, I replied coldly. That night, I made a decision. I knew they had installed surveillance equipment inside the drainage system running beneath my property, but instead of removing it, I planted wireless cameras of my own in the same access panels. If they were going to spy, so would Dia and I'd be watching them right back. The next day, while the inspector examined my property, my new cameras caught Gregory Phillips and a man I didn't recognize accessing the drainage system near the property line. They removed memory cards from their hidden cameras and discussed their next steps. Elizabeth wants him gone before the renewal date, Gregory said. We've got that condemnation hearing in 2 weeks. That should be enough. The other Monty, whom I later identified as Anthony Turner, a former police officer now serving as the Golden Meadows security chief, looked uneasy. This is going too far, Greg. The barn was one thing, a broken bar, but if anyone finds those devices, we're in serious trouble. Over the next several days, I launched a quiet but thorough campaign of documentation. Using satellite imagery from the Land Management Office, I mapped out areas where wetlands had been illegally filled. I photographed violations, non-native landscaping, pollution runoff from the golf course, neglected public access trails. Then I met with Councilman Benjamin Thostra, one of the few officials not tied to Elizabeth. As he reviewed my findings, his face tightened. This is worse than I thought. They've ignored almost every requirement in their original grant. He paused, tapping one document. This one's especially serious. The sacred spring on your land is listed as a protected cultural landmark. They're obligated to preserve access for tribal ceremonies. The next day, I received yet another notice. My property had been reported as abandoned following the fire, triggering an expedited condemnation process. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks out, just before Golden Meadows' renewal deadline. That evening, George Wilson knocked on my door, urgency in his voice. William, you need to see this. He led me to the back of his property, where we could see into a section of Golden Meadows. In the distance, Elizabeth Montgomery was leading a group of investors through a site now under construction. They're breaking ground on that rec center, George said grimly, on land they don't legally own yet. I recorded everything. Elizabeth spoke with confidence, presenting the development as a certainty. The next morning, Abigail called me. William, you need to come here, now. At the county office, she showed me a series of emails and property maps recovered from system archives. They revealed something I hadn't expected. Elizabeth and Gregory had altered flood zone data to make my land appear part of a high-risk watershed. It was a manufactured crisis engineered to justify the county seizing control. They've been planning this for years, Abigail said, anger rising in her voice. I had enough evidence for a fight, but Elizabeth's connections made a direct attack too risky. I needed to be strategic. So, I reached out to Heather Jackson, an investigative journalist from the regional paper, not the local one that relied on real estate ad revenue. I can't promise anything, she warned when we met at a quiet coffee shop outside of town, but if your evidence is legit, this could be big. I handed over the altered maps, photos, emails, and inspection reports. Her eyes widened. This isn't just HOA overreach, she said. It's systemic fraud. She agreed to investigate further but promised to delay publication until we had a complete, airtight case. Next, I approached retired Judge Albert Grahama, a Golden Meadows resident known for his fairness and independence. I moved here for peace in my retirement, he said, shaking his head as he pored over my files. Instead, I'm living under a petty dictatorship. His judicial demeanor slipped as he processed the evidence. This is outrageous, he muttered. They're violating environmental laws, falsifying public records, and destroying private property. He slowly removed his glasses. Mr. Hayes, what you have here could lead to both civil and criminal charges. His support was a turning point. As a respected former judge, his voice would carry serious weight with county officials. I need to build a coalition, I explained. People willing to speak out when the moment comes. Judge Graham nodded. You'll have them. Many here are growing tired of the HOA's corruption. It's time we stood together. We just needed evidence and leadership. While keeping up appearances at work, I continued gathering documentation of Golden Meadows violations. I maintained a calm, professional front while preparing their land grant renewal paperwork. even as the harassment against me escalated. Director Howard kept me in the loop. "They're pushing harder for your recusal," she warned one afternoon. "The mayor's office is involved now, and they're lobbying the county commissioner." Meanwhile, I reviewed footage from my hidden cameras daily. Gregory and Anthony made frequent visits to their illegal surveillance equipment. But then I caught something new. Elizabeth herself, issuing a direct order. "Make sure Hayes is under constant surveillance." That alone was a serious violation of privacy laws, and a critical addition to my case. The surprise came when Anthony Turner lingered behind one day. He seemed hesitant, uneasy. Pulling out his phone, he snapped a few photos of the drainage system and muttered, "This isn't right." I took note. Turner might be starting to regret his role. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit at my office from Natalie Phillips, Gregory's wife. She looked anxious, glancing over her shoulder before slipping inside. "Mr. Hayes, I don't have long. Gregory can't know I'm here." She set a USB drive on my desk. "These are internal HOA emails and minutes from the last 3 years. I didn't know what they were really doing. A broken barn not until they burned down your barn." She paused. "That was deliberate, wasn't it?" I nodded. "We believe so, but proving it has been a broken barn difficult." Natalie straightened up, a flicker of resolve in her expression. "These might help. There are discussions about removing obstacles on your land, strategies to force you out." Elizabeth even joked about how inconvenient a fire would be. I stared at the USB drive. It could contain the proof I'd been desperate for. "But why are you helping?" I asked. Her voice tightened. "They destroyed my garden last month. The roses I've grown for 20 years." Said they were non-conforming plants. "But the truth?" I spoke up. "When they cut down the old oak by the community center, that tree was sacred. My daughter's part Native American through my first husband. That tree mattered to her." The condemnation hearing was scheduled for Monday, just 3 days before Golden Meadows land grant renewal would hit my desk. That weekend, with my brother Philip's legal help, I organized every piece of evidence. On Sunday night, Hudson Brooks, the developers behind the proposed recreation center, announced a $20 million community enhancement initiative. The timing was no coincidence. They were trying to generate political pressure in advance of both hearings. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Security Office Southtown, tomorrow 8 a.m. It was vague, but I suspected Anthony Turner. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I drove past the Golden Meadows security office. Turner was outside, pretending to inspect his truck. As I passed, he slipped an envelope beneath his windshield wiper. I circled back after he'd gone inside. Inside the envelope were printed emails between Elizabeth and Gregoria discussing how the electrical panel had been prepared before the barn crew ever arrived. A handwritten note was included. "My nephew was at the Sacred Spring ceremony last year. This has gone too far." By Monday morning, clouds loomed overhead, a fitting backdrop for what was coming. Outside the county building, Elizabeth Montgomery and Mayor Bennett stood in hushed conversation. They fell silent as I approached. Elizabeth offered a tight smile. "Mr. Hayes, I do hope this process isn't too difficult for you. Sometimes a broken bar letting go is the healthiest choice." I returned the smile, just as brittle. "I appreciate your concern, Elizabeth. I've been doing a lot of research lately at property boundaries, environmental law, surveillance regulations, fascinating topics." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Inside the packed hearing room, I spotted Judge Graham sitting in the back. He gave me a subtle nod. When my name was called, I approached the podium with steady calm. "Members of the board," I began, "this hearing isn't about safety. It's about a calculated attempt to seize my property through fraudulent means." A murmur passed through the room. I placed a thick stack of documents on the table. "I have evidence that the Golden Meadows HOA has committed environmental violations, manipulated boundary records, and engaged in criminal behavior including arson and illegal surveillance." Elizabeth's control finally slipped. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "Mr. Hayes is just bitter over losing an unsafe building and is retaliating with nonsense." County Commissioner Allison Wright, silent until now, leaned forward. "Are you saying the satellite images of wetland destruction, the altered boundary records, and the surveillance evidence are all fabricated. Elizabeth froze. Yeah, broken bar. What surveillance evidence? I laid down printed photographs showing the surveillance devices hidden in my drainage system installed without consent and used to monitor my property. The commissioner turned to the county attorney. I believe we need to suspend this condemnation hearing pending a full investigation. Mayor Bennett tried to protest, but Wright cut him off. Furthermore, I'm ordering a comprehensive review of all Golden Meadows permits and environmental compliance history before their renewal is considered. Elizabeth's face had gone pale. As the hearing adjourned, she stormed out, already dialing her phone. The first battle had been won, but the war was only just beginning. That Wednesday, the headline on the regional newspaper read, "Golden Meadows HOA under fire for fraud, surveillance, and environmental abuse." The headline hit like a lightning bolt. Development fraud, HOA accused of document falsification and environmental crimes. Heather Jackson's investigative article presented the evidence: meticulously altered boundary maps, illegally filled wetlands, covert surveillance, and disturbing details surrounding the barn fire on my property. By the time the morning news cycle was in full swing, local reporters had gathered at the Golden Meadows gate, demanding statements from Elizabeth Montgomery and the HOA board. Across town, county commissioners held an emergency meeting. The verdict: the Golden Meadows land grant renewal was officially suspended pending further investigation. I watched from the back of the chamber as Commissioner Wright called for a comprehensive audit of all development permits issued during Mayor Bennett's term. Notably, the mayor had called in sick and was absent. Gregory Phillips tried to speak for the HOA, but he was clearly out of his depth. "These allegations are completely unfounded," he insisted weakly. "Golden Meadows has always operated within the law." Commissioner Wright wasn't buying it. "Mr. Phillips, we have satellite images showing that protected wetlands were filled in to expand your golf course. Do you care to explain how that qualifies as a compliance?" Gregory tugged at his collar. "I'd have to consult our environmental impact reports." "The same reports," she interrupted, "that were altered after approval?" The room fell silent. Residents of Golden Meadows, many hearing this for the first time, stirred uncomfortably. Then Judge Graham stood up. "As a resident and former county judge, I'm calling for a full audit of the HOA's finances. We've paid thousands in environmental compliance fees, and now we learn it may all be fraudulent?" His statement sparked a wave of agreement. The commission voted unanimously to widen the investigation to include financial misconduct. Outside, I was approached by representatives from Hudson and Brooks, the developers behind the proposed $20 million recreation center. "In light of recent events," said Mr. Hayes, the senior partner, "we are reconsidering our involvement in the Golden Meadows project." "I understand," I said, "with the land grant in limbo and penalties looming, that's probably a wise move." "We were told all permits were legitimate," he added, glancing around nervously. "Our company values sustainability. This compromises that." "There are responsible ways to develop land," I offered. "My grandfather believed in balanced growth that protected what matters." They exchanged a look. "Maybe we should discuss a new direction as something that aligns with community values and environmental responsibility." It was a surprising but welcome shift. Our potential allies where before they were only adversaries. Later that afternoon, I was summoned to the sheriff's office. Fire Chief Carter and a county arson investigator were already waiting. "William," Sheriff Warren began, sliding a folder across the desk, "we've concluded the investigation into your barn fire." Inside the folder, physical evidence, witness accounts, and video footage. Their conclusion? The fire had been caused by deliberate negligence during unauthorized work on my land. "Do you have enough to press charges?" I asked. The fire chief didn't hesitate. "We have more than enough." He opened the laptop and played a video captured by Linda Wilson's garden camera. It showed Elizabeth Montgomery and Gregory Phillips instructing workers to remove fire suppression equipment from around my barn just before the incident. Elizabeth's voice rang out clearly. "Make sure there's nothing to stop a spark from catching. An old structure like this is just waiting for an electrical mishap." It was unmistakably and devastating. "We're filing criminal charges," said Sheriff Warren. "Destruction of property, fraud, reckless endangerment. We've already contacted both Montgomery and Phillips. They're surrendering their passports. I could hardly believe it. After everything, finally, real consequences. What's next? I asked. The sheriff's response was steady. Now we follow the trail of surveillance operations, falsified records, financial deception. This isn't just home misconduct, it's a criminal conspiracy. And Mayor Bennett, he's already been subpoenaed. Just as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A message from Abigail. Turn on channel 12. Now, I ducked into the nearest coffee shop and caught the broadcast just in time to see Elizabeth Montgomery being led out of the Golden Meadows clubhouse in handcuffs. Her expression a mix of rage and disbelief. Gregory Phillips followed, head bowed, eyes hidden from the cameras. The next morning, I presented my findings to the Land Management Division. Director Howard had assembled environmental experts, county legal staff, and Commissioner Wright. I laid everything out: satellite evidence of wetland destruction, water samples showing contamination, habitat studies documenting wildlife loss, and files proving the illegal removal of protected species. I closed with a clear, unwavering recommendation: deny the land grant renewal. No approval should proceed until every violation is corrected and a full environmental remediation plan is in place. The room fell into a heavy silence as my colleagues absorbed the full weight of the restoration plan and the documentation behind it. Finally, Commissioner Wright broke the stillness. This is the most thorough and damning record of environmental violations I've encountered in my entire public service career, he said. Then, turning to me, he added, Mr. Hayes, despite the personal attacks, the loss of your property, and attempts to discredit your work, you've upheld your integrity. The county owes you not only gratitude but an apology. That evening, a line of cars appeared on my driveway. Residents of Golden Meadows, led by Judge Graham and the Wilsons, stepped out one by one. I braced myself for another dispute but instead, they came with food, drinks, and something unexpected, a proposition. We're forming a new homeowners association, Judge Graham said as neighbors laid out dishes and blankets near the charred remains of my barn. One that honors property rights, environmental safeguards, and true community input. And we'd like your help your guidance in building it the right way. Linda Wilson stepped forward, eyes reflective. Those of us who've lived here the longest remember when all this was farmland. Your grandfather protected his share, and we should have fought harder for ours. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting golden light across the land. Strangers who had once seen me as a troublemaker were now allies. Gathered in solidarity, over a simple shared meal, we began envisioning a different kind of neighborhood, a one rooted in respect instead of regulation, stewardship instead of control. George raised a glass to William Hayes, who reminded us that doing what's right is never easy, but always worth it. 3 months passed. The county courthouse was filled to capacity. The long-awaited hearing on Golden Meadows land grant renewal had arrived. In that time, investigations had peeled back layers of corruption reaching deep into the heart of local government. Mayor Bennett had resigned in disgrace, buried beneath allegations of bribery and evidence tampering. Gregory Phillips, faced with mounting charges, took a plea deal and agreed to testify against Elizabeth Montgomery. She now sat at the defendant's table, stripped of her designer arrogance, her expression muted but her defiance not completely extinguished. This hearing would decide the future of the Golden Meadows development. The commission would determine whether it could move forward under new, heavily conditioned terms or if it should be halted altogether to address the environmental damage inflicted. Representing the Land Management Division, I presented our findings and recommendations. The violations are serious, I explained, but not beyond repair. With full remediation of restoring wetlands, removing illegal structures, implementing strict water protection to compliance is achievable. Commissioner Wright, now acting as interim mayor, led the panel. Mr. Hayes, given everything this project has cost the community, what oversight measures do you suggest moving forward? I had come prepared. I recommend forming an environmental compliance committee, including representatives from county agencies, independent environmental experts, and local residents. Quarterly inspections, transparent, public reporting, and steep financial penalties for any future violations. Judge Graham stood on behalf of the newly formed Homeowners Association. We fully support these conditions. We've already begun voluntary cleanup efforts and have launched an internal environmental stewardship program. When Elizabeth Montgomery was finally given the floor, she clung to her old tactics. These so-called violations, she claimed, are just industry norms. Any development in this county would look bad if scrutinized this intensely. Commissioner Wright didn't flinch. Then perhaps every development should be scrutinized this intensely. Environmental laws aren't suggestions, Miss Montgomery, they're the standard, and you failed to meet it. The Commission's decision was swift and unanimous. The land grant would be renewed but under strict conditions: complete environmental remediation, rigid oversight, and heavy penalties for any misstep. In addition, all improperly annexed property ESA including my grandfather's rancho were officially removed from HOA jurisdiction. The boundaries were redrawn and legally restored to their rightful lines. And in recognition of its historical and environmental value, my property was granted protected status, shielding it from future development. Outside the courthouse, reporters jostled for comments, cameras flashing, microphones extended. I kept my statement short and resolute. This isn't about victory, it's about accountability. Now, we move forward a wiser, stronger, and more united than before. The ruling made one thing clear: environmental protection matters, property rights matter, and no amount of money, influence, or connections puts someone above the law. When asked about Elizabeth Montgomery, who now faced possible jail time for her role in the barn fire and the cover-up that followed, I kept my response measured. The courts will decide what justice looks like, I said. My focus is on rebuilding what was last and making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Criminal proceedings moved slowly, but the wheels of justice turned. Elizabeth was ultimately convicted of criminal negligence, fraud, and conspiracy. She received a 3-year sentence, though 2 years were suspended. Gregory Phillips walked away with probation in return for his cooperation and testimony. The developers, Hudson and Brooks, returned Nita but with an unexpected offer. Not for tennis courts or clubhouses, but for something entirely different: a conservation easement and a public education center focused on sustainable land practices. We've reevaluated our approach to development in this region, their representative explained. Turns out, your grandfather's vision of responsible growth aligns with modern environmental priorities. This could be the future. I didn't fully trust Thema, but I didn't dismiss the proposal either. It was a chance to turn all the conflict into something constructive via a real-world example of how preservation and progress don't have to be enemies. 1 year after inheriting my grandfather's land, I stood on that same soil, watching volunteers raise the timber frame of a new barn. It stood on the ashes of the old Onia rebuilt with sustainable materials, honoring the past while embracing the future. George and Linda Wilson helped hammer the beams into place. Judge Graham handed out water bottles. Abigail Taylor, along with dozens of neighbors from both Golden Meadows and nearby areas, pitched in. Together, we weren't just rebuilding a barn, we were repairing a community. Director Howard had approved my proposal for a new role within the county: Environmental Compliance Director. I now had the authority to apply the hard lessons from Golden Meadows across the entire region. And the insurance settlement, along with a civil judgment against the former HOA board, funded the creation of a legal aid program for any homeowner battling against unjust association policies. As the volunteers worked, Councilman Foster approached with a quiet smile. The Haze Protection Act passed unanimously this morning, he said. Legislation named after my grandfather but inspired by everything we had just gone through. It enforced limits on HOA authority, demanded environmental transparency from developers, and ensured land grant decisions were subject to public scrutiny. A fitting tribute to a man who had spent a lifetime protecting a small but important patch of Colorado. Later, when the noise had faded and the crowd dispersed, I walked out to the edge of the new barn, knelt, and planted a young apple tree grown from cuttings of my grandfather's original orchard. As I patted down the earth, my hand brushed something metal buried just beneath the surface. I pulled it free. A small, rusted box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a photo, A black and white image from the 1920s. My great-grandfather stood in front of the original barn, his family gathered around him, eyes bright with pride. Somehow, it had survived both time and fire, protected in that humble metal case. I stood, holding the photo in one hand, resting the other on the warm timber of the new barn. This land has always been worth fighting for, I whispered, and not to anyone in particular, but to the mountains, the trees, the sky, and the memory of those who came before. And now, it always will be. In the distance, the lights of Golden Meadows flickered and no longer looming or intrusive, but simply part of the landscape, a reminder that farms and neighborhoods, history and innovation, solitude and community can coexist. The fight had been long, the damage was real, but as dusk settled around me, I felt something stronger than victory: my grandfather's presence, his approval. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the most weight, and sometimes, changing the world starts with a single person who refuses to be moved, who knows exactly which ground is worth standing on. Another unforgettable story, a broken bar courtesy of Yaw Stories. If your jaw's still on the floor, you're right where you belong. Subscribe and stay.